Seen the He Gets Us ad campaign? It's a $100 million ad campaign whose focus is to spread the message of Jesus and his love and acceptance of others. When we look at the Bible, what does the He really get us? Well, let's talk about what Jesus and his spokespeople get us.
I'll be honest, I didn't expect it to be coming out this morning at time of going live, but shows I need to watch my calendar more. As you saw in that Reels run I stitched in the front of this video, occasional contributor to the atheist community of Austin, MD Aware, or Dr. Aware as we will refer to him in this video, mentioned the He Gets Us ad that was on display at the Super Bowl, and said that Jesus doesn't in fact get us, and referenced a number of biblical passages that emphasise his points. Not only was it too long to get anything done in terms of rebuttal in the shorts, but it required more research than I could perform during that brief time period. So, knowing me, here we are, with just such a thing, and we're taking a look at those points and the passages he helpfully provided to see if Jesus does indeed get us, or if he doesn't. Personally, just off the top of my head, I think the good doctor should retake his research rotation, but let us see what he suggests, and therefore what the Bible says. Does Jesus, in fact, get us?
He gets us to excuse misogyny, as you see in Ephesians 5, verse 22.
Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. Wives, submit to your own husbands, as to the Lord.
This is a classic one used by people who try to say the Bible is misogynistic. Sidney Davis Jr. also used this and more in a Reels run that should be coming out next month, I think. Yes. As ever, it is used out of context and as a clear cherry pick, since the verse beforehand says that both husband and wife should submit to each other. And much of the rest of the verse, much of the rest of the chapter, is about the husband being unto the wife as Christ was to the church. Jesus died for the church, and thus man should suffer just as much for his wife. Many might say that man already does, in a way. Also, the submission of the wife is heavily implied in the Greek to be directly correlated with the husband being Christ-like. Seeing as Christ was very supportive of women and metering out justice in the proper manner, even preventing a woman from being stoned to death for adultery because the man wasn't brought out to face the same punishment, this isn't the best verse to claim that Jesus supported misogyny. So as much as Sidney and Dr. MD might say so, it is not misogynistic.
He gets us to normalize hate. You see this in Proverbs 13:24.
Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them.
How does this one normalise hate? This is the confusing one. I can only guess that he had a different verse in mind for this, since this one is more about disciplining a child, which doesn't in fact involve hate, unless you say that if someone hates their child, they won't discipline them, which is something they say they shouldn't do, which is sort of weird and counterintuitive, since discipline in this case does not literally mean beating, despite what they might claim. But if anyone cares to reference a more appropriate verse, please do so in the comments. I'm open to suggestions.
He gets us to practice bigotry, like you see in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13.
Leviticus 20, verse 13. If a man has sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads.
A classic bigotry verse speaking out against homosexuality, apparently. I've already covered this in previous videos, which I will link below. But to sum it up, it's to prevent STDs from passing around in a manner that can't produce children. This may seem ridiculous, but considering multiple references to this being done by people who practice orgies, and other references concerning unclean bodily discharges, this isn't unreasonable, and actually factors in God in the explanation if you apply it scientifically. There's no other way that they would have known about STDs or anything related to that at that time without an all-knowing God.
He gets us to ignore science. You see it in Mark, chapter 10, verse 46 to 52.
Mark chapter 10, verse 46 to 52. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside, begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road.
Another one that is more than a bit confusing, since a miracle doesn't exactly imply we should ignore science, does it? Maybe the idea of faith healing is being pushed here, which seems reasonable, especially when you consider a couple of medical studies have been done on spontaneous vision recovery, and it is possible under specific conditions. Unfortunately, it doesn't in any way try to make Christians disregard science. So I really don't know what they're aiming for here. Again, if anyone can reference a better suited verse on that front, please comment them below.
He gets us division.
This one is in two parts, so we'll focus on the first one first.
Matthew 10, 34 to 36.
Matthew 10, 34 to 36. Do not suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household.
A classic out-of-context slam. The moment you read the surrounding verses, you see that Christ is asking us to turn against people who are against him, which in those times were generally not nice people, since loving him involved following his laws of love, care, and forgiveness. Those who don't allow you to follow that path are a negative influence, and you should pursue that path above all. Weirdly similar to advice given by other members of the ACA to go for what is right, not what will please the family. Particularly important for those who might be feeling like they like members of the same sex, or that they don't feel like they're in the right body, or they don't believe the same things.
And in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14.
2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. Do not yoke yourself together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness?
The second is similar, and is actually reinforced by the first in this way. which is clearly a backfire, as I wouldn't have expected this one to crop up. Basically, don't associate with those that don't respect your values and are likely to drag you down as well. Again, common advice given by the ACA and also encouraged by people of all persecuted groups. In short, don't let the haters change you. This is advice I commonly give to people who are being bullied. Don't let them change you. This is advice given by Jesus and by secular people.
I mean, bottom line, he gets us nowhere.
Not being particularly interested in football of any kind, I had to look up this ad. And I think the deeper meaning of it is lost on those like Dr. Aware. It shows people who traditionally have been seen as higher in status washing the feet of those that would have been subordinate to them. This is important. How? Well, the custom of washing feet is one that goes back to Jesus' time, when all people wore sandals in the dust of the desert climate of Israel. This is normally left up to a person of lower rank in the household, like a servant or a slave. But Jesus, one they called teacher and Lord, knelt before them and washed his disciples' feet. Many stories of kings, lords and masters giving traditional signs of respect reserved not only for them or people of higher status, giving them to those below them at a moment of deserving, are commonplace. So this concept isn't entirely lost. In fact, if you read books like The Lord of the Rings or The Inheritance Cycle, you find that referenced constantly. But the words of Jesus in that verse shows that God sees all people as equal. And that's something Jesus came to show. The ad showed that by showing images of those who would otherwise be seen as high and mighty, holier than thou, or bigoted, washing the feet of those who would have been looked down on by those people. It could be people of colour, it could be immigrants, it could be addicts, those who have different political, religious or social views, those who are marginalised for any number of reasons, were represented in that video and given the same loving treatment by those that normally persecute them. So does Dr. Aware make good points? Not really. Any amount of study can prove the ones that his references have any traction on and the quotes that he used to prove the ad was wrong about hate not being in the Bible was poorly chosen and wasn't about hate beyond a lack of discipline. Far from implying Jesus doesn't get us. He's not only proved that Jesus does, but also that he himself has a lack of study into these things, which doesn't give me confidence in the title of MD he uses. In short, Jesus gets us, but MD Aware doesn't get Jesus, and certainly doesn't get us. I'll be honest, these long-form videos often take time to research and to make, but they're still very enjoyable, and this one was interesting because of the many Bible passages that needed looking into. I enjoy these because, well, it gives me more things to study, more reason to focus, and actually areas I can look into in particular, which is useful. It also helped me with some research for another video, which I plan doing in the future. It'll probably be out sometime in the new year. As much as I may put down Dr. Aware and other members of the atheist community of Austin for their lack of study on the things they try to trash us about, I have a great deal of respect for them, and do these videos for the sake of education, and highly encourage people to do their research to gain deeper understanding of the Bible and the Word of God. Maybe their intent is to weaken the church, by doing this. But if we take their action, and by that do our study, we may end up turning the tide and turning their attempt to weaken the church into the very means of strengthening it. Sometimes it's in the darkest places that we find the most use for light. Thank you. Stay safe, and God be with you, my friends.